And I think it's quite important to differentiate between my just feeling sorry for her when she first told me to that act of understanding when she told me the second time. In the first case, I was an outsider, like one of those strangers. I was pitying her. And pity, sometimes going under the name of compassion or caring, in itself is no good. It has no healing effect. It reminded me of something Graham Greene says in his novel, The Ministry of Fear. He says, pity is a terrible thing. People talk about the passion of love. Pity is the worst passion of all because it doesn't outlive it like sex. So I started with pity and then moved to understanding. A patient taught me this once by saying, if you pity me, it means I'm condemned to this state and there's no hope of reprieve. So I started with pity and moved to a shared experience with her. My own experience was the instrument which the emotional act took hold of, producing thereby what we know as understanding. And I think it's a great betrayal to say to someone, I understand, if really, truly, you haven't. Now, I did not have a conscious image of my own loss of my parents at the age of 11 when they disappeared down the drive in that hearse-like motor car. But on the second occasion when she told me, I believe that this emotional memory was the instrument that fashioned my understanding. She was no longer alone any more than I. She needed me not as a stranger, but as a fellow sufferer. I did not share it with her in the way she shared hers with me, but I believe that in that sudden moment of shock when I felt close to tears and the appalling awfulness of what had happened to her, that she felt me as a fellow sufferer. There is communication at this level, as I've said, before there are any words, and the act of understanding happens in a flash, in a nanosecond. Images followed by words are the elaboration of that happening. So what I want to emphasize here is the image born of experience that is necessary for the act of understanding. The outer details are always different, but the inner experience is similar enough for the connection to occur. I did not have the experience of believing that my parents were dead, but I did have the experience of losing them on my own and among strangers. And although her experience was worse, I think there was enough similarity for the connection to occur. Also, she and I were about the same age when these events occurred. So the instrument which enables this emotional act is the shared experience. The instrument which enables the act of understanding is an experience which is in sympathy with the experience of the other. In order to understand the particular distress of the other, I reach for a parallel within my own experience. I then use that to enter into the experience of the other. And in that moment of understanding, I and the other are one through a togetherness achieved through a sort of mutuality of experience. Because the experience is similar, it enters the experience of the other. But it only becomes such an instrument when it is shorn of all the outer particulars. That moment when I lost my parents, a loss of those I loved and utterly depended upon, was a disaster. Reaching to this loss and arriving at it brought me into sympathetic union with the young teenager who thought her parents were dead. We were together. The intensity of the inner experience shut out all those differences between us. I at the time was an adult man of 40 years of age. She was a young girl of 15. My experience had been of losing my parents on my first day of boarding school. Hers was losing her parents on a beach. In the act of understanding, In that momentary flash, my experience and hers are in a joint intensity, and all the outer contours of our lives are shut out. Or to use a structure that's been formulated by a man called Michael Polanyi. I don't know if you've come across him, but he's a very sort of deep thinker on all these matters. He refers to the outworks of our lives, which are, he says, subsidiary to a focal point. And he says the focal point is the union of which her experience and mine, in this case, were one. And I'll just give you a quote from Michael Polanyi. He says, when we comprehend a particular set of items as parts of a whole, the focus of our attention is shifted from the hitherto uncomprehended particulars to the understanding of their joint meaning. This shift of attention does not make us lose sight of the particulars, since one can only see a whole by seeing the parts, but it changes altogether the manner in which we are aware of the particulars. We become aware of them now in terms of the whole on which we have fixed our attention. Now, to generalize, or in Polanyi's language, to take it from the part to the whole, so the action is an entering into the experience of the other, and the instrument through which it's achieved is a parallel experience, but shorn of all the subsidiary sort of elements. So in the example given, I seeing my parents leaving me at boarding school when I was aged 11 is subsidiary to the focal point of an experience of loss of people whom I loved, adored, and depended upon. We can therefore consider there are a series of focal experiences common to all human beings, and that these function as the instruments to bring about an entry into the other's experience. But it's like those focal experiences do have to be, as it were, transmitted through a personal experience, otherwise they don't really have life. And it's sort of an entry through one's own experience. I've sometimes used the Latin word entrare to try and explain that sort of way of entry. Michael Polanyi, whom I've mentioned, uses the word indwelling. To me, it doesn't have quite enough an active sense to it. I prefer to talk about enter or entrare. People with a fondness for Freud and sex may want to use the word penetrate. Now, there's also a correlate here which is worth dwelling upon. It is that entry into one's own experience sometimes requires the shock of another's agony to unlock the gateway to one's own experience. Clinicians trying to understand sometimes speak of a patient getting through to the therapist. So like this young girl got through to me when she said it a second time. Now Tolstoy understood this very well, and in his superb novel Anna Karenina, when Karenin was on his way from Petersburg back to his home in Moscow, when Anna was dying and in the process of giving birth to an illegitimate baby. The baby wasn't Karenin's, it was Vronsky's. As Karenin was going from St. Petersburg to Moscow, he hoped that she would die. But when he saw her, his heart melted, and Tolstoy says, it was not until he saw his dying wife that he knew his own heart. And there's a sort of very moving few pages after that where his sort of love and tenderness came out towards Anna. So it's the experience of the other can have this force behind it. And there is an implication here that there is a barrier in all of us to this act of entering, entrare. And the question is why? Why do we put up a barrier against it? And I think in order to answer this, it's necessary to understand a bit more fully what I've been saying.